What's going on, folks? Ted from Nerd Immersion here, and as it is the 29th of October as of me recording this, the Scions of Elemental Evil free adventure has released on D&D Beyond. I believe the Dungeon Master's Guide Early Access is also today. That should be probably in a couple hours from as of me recording this, but that being said, it is a cool little adventure. It is a throwback to the Temple of Elemental Evil. It is not nearly as in-depth or difficult as the Temple of Elemental Evil adventure was, or even Princes of the Apocalypse, realistically. But it is set in the world of Greyhawk, and it is designed for 4 to 6 level 4 characters. This is another adventure where we see the classic D&D cartoon characters, and the addition of that additional character, Nico, make a return as pre-made characters for you to run the adventure with. So, like I said, it's a relatively short adventure, but the main focus that I want to talk about today is the new monsters that were added. Now, there are some new magic items, and when I say, I guess new is the wrong word. There are the 2024 versions of the Beat of Force, the Boots of Elvenkind, and Sending Stones in here. But what I really want to focus on in this is the brand new monsters, the updated monsters. There also are some brand new ones as well. So here is the adventure. The way I got to it was I just went to sources, view all sources, scroll down to adventures, and then right here at the bottom is Scion of Elemental Evil. And here it is. And you can see again, here's the breakout. You have all the pre-made characters. These are the same characters we saw in Uni Hunt for the Lost Horn. And then again, if you were to go here, you can see the updated stat blocks. So we're going to go ahead and do a side-by-side comparison to see what's changed. We have the 2014 version on the left side and the 2024 version on the right side. So let's just dive in. First up here, we have the Berserker. Nothing really changed too much in the way of stat blocks or even hit points, movement speed. We do now have this gear section, which does say what they have on them. So the Berserker does have its gears, Great Axe, and Hide Armor. Those are things you can pick off of its body. They've removed the Reckless capability, which I'll be honest, I can tell you, having played some low-level adventures back in early 5e, this Berserker being able to just grant itself advantage all the time, like Reckless Attack, led to a near total party kill in a low-level, like, challenge rating. And we were all, like, level 2, maybe 3, and a couple of these guys showed up, and it was almost game over. That being said, they have lost their Reckless Attack kind of feature here. They still have a +5 to attack, and they still do the same amount of damage. So, it says, with advantage if the target doesn't have all of its hit points. So instead of it having to make a choice to do Reckless Attack like a Barbarian does, and then also getting advantage back, if the creature doesn't have all of its hit points, it just flat out has advantage, which is arguably way more powerful. There's no downside to this. And as long as anybody has damaged any of the player characters, this is almost worse because it doesn't have the drawback. So, again, for those of you wondering and talking about how, 2024 has led to some power creep and that the characters are more powerful, well, again, we only have one part of the story on that because we don't know what the monsters were going to look like. We saw a little bit in Uni Hunt for the Lost Horn and a handful of things that were released in various kind of promo images. But now we're kind of getting even more to get a handle on how much stronger are the monsters, because how much more is that going to help balance out what we're throwing, what we're dealing with as increased power players. Well, this is a pretty good example. The fact that, again, the Berserker is largely unchanged in almost every way, except needing to actively choose an ability that gives them a downside. They just get an always-on advantage when someone's damaged here with their new Great Axe attack. All right, next up we have the Cultist. Let's take a look here. It looks like we are more or less, again, in the same territory. We lost religion proficiency. They used to have Dark Devotion, which was advantage on saving throws against being charmed or frightened. They seem to have lost that entirely. However, and their Ritual Sickle has gone down in damage slightly from 1d. It was once 1d6 plus 1. It's now 1d4 plus 1 plus 1 necrotic damage. So the damage floor itself has increased in that you're going to be doing a minimum of 3 damage every time. So that is something to consider. I don't see too much else going on here. So next up here we have a Cultist Fanatic. Now we didn't really have a direct comparison, but I looked at the Black Earth Cultist from Princes of the Apocalypse, and it was similar in some ways, but some of these are again unique. So if we take a look at the Cultist Fanatic, it is 44 hit points. It is a challenge rating 2 with a 13 AC. Its stats are very similar, not quite identical, with just a swapping of the charisma and the wisdom to the Black Earth Cultist. Black Earth Cultist also wore a breastplate. This wears leather armor, but even the spells were kind of similar. It has its Pact Blade, the Cultist Fanatic, which does a D8 plus 2 plus a D6 necrotic damage, whereas the Fanatic, the Black Earth Cultist, it even says Fanatic. Did you see that in the name? So, it did only a D4 plus 2, but it had 2 attacks. As far as the spell casting goes, the Cultist Fanatic has a spell DC of 12. It also has Light and Thaumaturgy at will. It does not have, unfortunately, Sacred Flame, but it does get 2 a day command, 1 a day hold person, and then it does have here listed spread out into its bonus action is Spiritual Weapon. It can twice per day cast the Spiritual Weapon spell, which has a +4 to hit and does a D8 plus 2 force damage. So again, there's just a little more clarity for the dungeon master that even though spiritual weapon is a spell and it is sanctified here as a spell, I think you can see that right here. It does say cast the spiritual weapon spell. Because it is a bonus action, it is broken out into a separate little area here. And that's something else to consider, right? When we talk about monsters and their strength in comparison to the players, I'm seeing potentially a lot more of the enemy monsters have more clearly defined access to bonus actions and reactions. So we'll see if that it plays out the further we go down here. But I'm starting to like that change as well, because it's not that they're just going to do a movement and an attack. They have other things that they're able to do. This one, again, being spiritual weapon. All right, next up, this is one I'm very interested to do a comparison of. We have the fire elemental. Now, again, for the most part, remember that from what we've heard, I think, and then maybe we'll get into that a little bit here, that the challenge rating is not going to change for a lot of these. But it does clarify and confirm one of my suspicions, which we'll talk about here in a second. So, challenge rating is still the same, or sorry, challenge rating is the same, armor class and speed are the same. They did lose a little bit of hit points. They went from 102 in 2014 down to 93. Looks like all of the ability scores are the same. Now, this is something that I've been very keen on, been saying since the start, and I believe this is the example that's going to hold true. Do you notice over here in 2014, it used to say damage, resistance, bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing from non-magical attacks? Meaning that once you had access to a magical weapon, you could bypass the fire elemental's resistances. Well, notice now that the fire elemental in 2024 just has resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, slashing. So it doesn't matter if you're swinging a magical hammer or shooting a magical gun or, stabbing with a magical rapier, it still has resistance regardless of whether or not your weapon is magical or not. And I think that's going to be something we're going to see across the board for anything in 2014. Again, hold me to this, but my assumption is anything that we saw in 2014 and previous that had a quantifiable limitation to its resistances, like this, from non-magical attacks, from silver weapons, from non-silver weapons, from adamantine weapons, whatever. I think that's all going to be gone, and these creatures are just going to have flat-out bludgeoning, piercing, slashing resistance, which does make them effectively a lot more difficult to kill, a lot more resistant. Now, notice that this one now has a vulnerability to cold damage. That is a big shift. Now, it used to have this water susceptibility, which it does still have, but they're flat out giving it vulnerability to cold damage, which also makes me wonder, are we going to see more vulnerabilities in 2024? Again, we don't know. We've only seen a handful of things, but it would be interesting to see how many times have you played with a player when they're fighting an undead and they do radiant damage and they're like, oh, I do extra, right? Because it's radiant, and it just isn't the case. Maybe we'll start to see that making a comeback in this update. Who knows? Looks like the damage immunities to fire and poison are the same. Exhausted, grappled, paralyzed, poison, petrified, prone, restrained, unconscious. Okay, so it does have resistance to all of the same conditions. Same dark vision. All right, let's get into the traits. It had fiery form previously, which allowed it to squeeze through space 1 inch wide without squeezing. A creature that touches it also, with a melee attack within 5 feet, takes a d10 fire damage. In addition, it can enter a hostile creature's space. The first time it enters a space on a turn, that creature takes a d10 fire damage and catches fire. Until someone takes an action to douse the creature, they take a d10 fire damage at the start of each of their turns. Let's see how that translates. So first up, we have Fiery Aura, which is at the end of each of the elemental's turns, each creature in a 10-foot emanation originating from the elemental takes a d10 fire damage. Creatures and flammable objects in the emanation start burning. Reminder that burning is a new hazard. Let's go ahead and we'll pull that up real quick. I wish it unfortunately didn't show up as like a clickable hazard. So we're going to go ahead and just type in burning and pull that up. Because that is that just not good. Here it is, burning hazard. Okay, didn't take me to it. That's great. Anyway, the burning hazard states a burning creature or object takes a d4 fire damage at the start of each of its turns. As an action, you can extinguish fire on yourself by giving yourself the prone condition and rolling around on the ground. The fire also goes out if it's doused, submerged, or suffocated. So instead of having to quantify all of that information in a stat block for the fire elemental, they've established that the burning hazard is a thing, which means anything in the game that says it grants you the burning hazard is this. The creature starts burning, they're going to take a d4 fire damage at the start of each of their turns, unless somebody does a thing. You can extinguish the fire on yourself by, it's a whole action to give yourself the prone condition and rolling around, or if somebody else douses it. So that is the Fiery Aura. It was previously, if a creature touches the elemental or hits it with a melee attack within 5 feet, it takes the d10 fire damage. And then again, if it was in somebody's area, it would get them burning. Now, a 10-foot emanation around it, so 10 feet in every direction around it. If a creature at the end of each of its turn, each of the fire elemental's turn, creatures within that emanation take a d10 fire damage, and then if they are a creature, they immediately start burning. Which is, again, as long as they're in the emanation, they're going to start burning. So at the end of its turn, it's going to deal damage to everybody from who's close to it. And then at the start of their turn, if they haven't had a chance to move away before their turn starts, they're going to take a d4 damage. They are now on fire, and it's going to be a persistent thing. It also has Fire Form. They've kind of separated them out into Fiery Aura and Fire Form, which is, again, that ability to move through a 1 inch wide area without expending extra movement. And the first time it enters a creature's space on a turn, that creature takes a d10 fire damage. So interesting. They have removed what was the ability when you hit it, you took fire damage. They've removed that as like no reactionary damage from just hitting it. But being next to it, when it ends its turn, it's going to deal damage. And when you start your turn, you're going to take damage. And if it enters your space, you're going to take an extra d10 fire damage. It does shed that illumination. And previously, water susceptibility was for every 5 feet the elemental moves in water, or for every gallon of water splashed on it, it takes 1 cold damage. Now it says the elemental takes 1d6 cold damage for every 5 feet the elemental moves in water, or for every gallon of water splashed on it, which this is exceptionally more powerful because not only it was 1 cold damage previously, it is now a d6 cold damage, and that cold damage is doubled because it's vulnerable. So, again, hardier in that it's resistant to bludgeoning, piercing, slashing all the time, but this cold vulnerability and water susceptibility could be pretty brutal. It still makes 2 attacks on a turn. However, it used to do what was called a touch attack. It's now called a burn attack. In 2014, it was +6 to hit and did 2d6 plus 3 fire damage. And then that is where it ignited the creature as part of the touch attack. And it says until the creature takes an action to douse it, it was going to take a d10 fire damage at the start of each of its turn. It now is a +6 to hit, so that's the same. 2d6 plus 3 fire damage. And if the target is a creature or flammable object, it starts burning. Okay, so the damage is less. They are using the burning hazard here as opposed to it just taking a d10 damage and getting ignited. It now gets the burning condition, which is some less damage overall, and it is a little bit weaker with its cold vulnerability. But I think I like some of these changes quite a bit. The fact that if it moves next to you, it could hit you, and then just being in its presence at the end of your turn just deals some radial damage around it. And if you weren't burning already, it starts you burning at the start of your turn. So there's a pretty likely chance you're either going to have to just suffer through a d4 fire damage every turn pretty consistently as long as you're around this thing, or you're going to be constantly burning actions to put that fire out and then just get hit with it again and it's going to be back on. So, I don't know. I think I'm all for these changes to the fire elemental. I'm curious if the other elementals are going to get vulnerabilities now as well. All right, we have the gray ooze here. AC, armor class, all that stuff is the same. Same resistances, same condition immunity, still blind sight. Still has amorphous. All right, corrosive form. Used to be pretty brutal. It was after dealing damage. If a creature, a non-magical weapon made of metal hits the ooze, it corrodes. After dealing damage, the weapon takes a permanent and cumulative -1 damage to penalty to damage rolls. If the penalty drops to -5, it is destroyed. Non-magical ammunition made of metal that hits the ooze is destroyed after dealing damage. Okay. It now has corrosive form. A creature that hits the ooze with a melee attack takes a d8 force damage, d8 acid damage, and the ooze eats through 2-inch thick non-magical wood or metal in 1 round. Does that mean, okay, I guess that means if you're like stuck your sword in it and it stays in it, it will eat through it in a round? Or does it just completely destroy it? That could use some clarification. But we're now, okay, so take back what I said previously about removing reactionary damage, because the Grey Ooze has that. If you hit the Grey Ooze with a melee attack, you're just going to take a d8 acid damage, period, which was not something it had previously, so that's a little bit of a bump for the Grey Ooze. And again, the Ooze eats through 2-inch thick non-magical wood or metal in a round. So again, I guess if I'm hitting it with a non-magical quarterstaff or a non-magical sword, it does eat through it as long as it's 2 inches of it, 2-inch thick of it in 1 round. But my question is, if I hit it and then pull my sword away, is it still going to eat through it, or do I have to like be in contact with it? And that could, if it's just like I touch it and that's it, that could be infinitely way stronger than the original corrode metal ability, because if I just hit the thing, not only am I taking damage, but I might just lose my weapon immediately. And then remember, this thing's only a challenge rating 1/2, so the chances of you fighting it pretty early on with a non-magical weapon is pretty likely. Let's take a look at the pseudopod. It's still +3 to hit. It used to deal a d6 +1 bludgeoning damage and an additional 2d6 acid damage. And then it would do this, corrode it and then take away armor, AC. Now they've changed it to no longer deal any bludgeoning damage. It just does 2d6 +1 acid damage. And then it says non-magical armor worn by the target takes a -1 penalty to the AC. The armor is destroyed if the penalty reduces its AC to 10. The penalty can be removed by a creature who takes the utilize action and succeeds on a DC 15 dexterity check using Tinker tools to repair the armor. Okay, that's actually pretty cool and a unique little thing for it to give the Tinker's tools like a combat use too. In that, again, if you can make a DC 15 dexterity check with Tinker's tools, you can repair the armor with only a utilize action in combat. Obviously, probably more designed to do that outside of combat, but there's nothing reason you saying you can't do that during a fight, which is pretty cool. So I like that, a little bit of extra flavor added in there. All right, next up we have the Incubus. The Incubus and the Succubus seem to have the exact same stat block, but let's see. Same armor class, same hit points. Looks like same ability scores. Okay. Now, interesting, they removed a resistance. It used to have resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, slashing from non-magical attacks. They have removed that entirely. Removed. Oh my god, I'm just clicking everything. They've also removed its lightning resistance and gave it psychic resistance. So that's some interesting changes. It was, again, cold, fire, lightning, poison, and then non-magical, attacks. The bludgeoning, piercing, slashing is gone. The lightning resistance is gone, and we've added in psychic. Very interesting. Okay, we have shape changer here, which was allowed it to change between various forms. Now it is called succubus form, which is when the incubus finishes a long rest, it can shapeshift into a succubus using the stat block instead of this one. Any equipment it's wearing or carrying isn't transformed. Previously, it had the ability to change it to any small or medium humanoid. They seem to have removed that in the favor of it just being an incubus. All right, it used to only have one attack. Now it has multi-attack. It used to have a claw, which did a d6 plus 3 slashing. Now it has the nightmare touch, which does significantly more damage. It used to do 1d6 plus 3 with its claw for only one attack when in its fiend form. It now has 3d6 plus 5 psychic damage with a plus 7 to hit, and the target is cursed for 24 hours or until the incubus dies. Until the curse ends, the target gains no benefit from finishing short rests. And it can do 2 of those in a turn. That is a pretty sizable bump in damage and power, if I do say so myself, right? From a d6 plus 3 with a plus 5 to hit to 3d6 plus 5 with a plus 7 to hit. And again, reminder, this is all psychic damage, which is very not a lot of things resist psychic damage. And then again, the curse there's no saving throw for the curse. If it hits you, you are cursed, period, and get no benefit from a short rest. So that means no healing, that means no spell slots back if you're a warlock, no focus points back if you're a monk, none of the stuff back if you're a fighter. That's pretty brutal. It doesn't have a charm ability anymore. It now has spell casting. One of those is Charm Person, which it can cast at will. It also has Disguise Self at will, probably in favor to change up what was the Shape Changer ability. It is now just Disguise Self at will. It also has Etherealness here at will, which is again something it had previously. But it also has 2 additional once per day spells, one being Dream and the other being Hypnotic Pattern. Now, it used to have this ability here called Draining Kiss, where it would make them make a Constitution saving throw, take a bunch of psychic damage, or have their hit points reduced. It seems that what we have instead here is the Nightmare ability, which again, it can be done as a bonus action. Previously, it was an action, so once again, we're seeing additions of extra action economy. And this recharges on a 6, Wisdom saving throw DC 15, on a creature of its choice within 60 feet. If it fails and it has 20 or fewer hit points, it has the unconscious condition for 1 hour until it takes damage or a creature within 5 feet of it takes an action to wake it. Otherwise, it takes 4d8 psychic damage. So less, it had the Draining Kiss ability where it could try to, basically sap a bunch of your energy, reduce your maximum hit points and things like that. That was also a kiss and you had to get close to you and all that kind of stuff. This Nightmare ability, which again is a bonus action, potentially on top of its 2 attacks from up above, that can reduce your, ability to use a short rest. It can choose somebody as a bonus action to possibly just knock them unconscious. No saving throw, mind you. Or sorry, wisdom saving throw. My bad. Wisdom saving throw against a creature within 60 feet. 20 hit points or fewer, just unconscious. Or 48 psychic damage. I think overall a little bit of change potentially to the the nature of the creature compared to what it had previously. But I think this is a serious power bump overall for this creature with the addition of some of the extra spells in here as well. Potentially churning out a lot more damage, being a lot more deadly for the players to face, for sure. All right, next up here we have the Knight. Looks like still has plate mail. A lot of the stuff is the same from the looks of it. Again, we have the gear where it says it has a great sword, heavy crossbow, and plate armor. So if you defeat a knight, your DM really can't argue with you too much. You can just loot the plate armor off of the guy. But there you go. All right, it still has 2 melee attacks. It used to have advantage on saving throws against frightened. It appears they've removed that entirely. Its greatsword still is plus 5 to hit, still does 2d6 plus 3 slashing damage. However, the greatsword does an additional 1d8 radiant damage now, and that also gets applied to the heavy crossbow, which now does 2d10 piercing damage. So the heavy crossbow got a serious upgrade in that its damage got essentially doubled from 1d10 to 2d10, and both of the greatsword and heavy crossbow got a d8 added to them in radiant damage. They did remove the leadership capability, which was kind of a cool thing I liked about it, that it could basically issue a command to a non-hostile creature within 30 feet, and they make an attack roll, and they add a d4 to that roll. So basically like a commander strike for a fighter. They've removed that, but they have still kept the parry ability, but added some qualifying language, right? Trigger. The knight is hit by a melee attack roll while holding a weapon. Response. The knight adds 2 to its AC against the attack, possibly causing it to miss. So we're seeing a lot more of this. We saw this in the Green Dragon stat block. It very clearly spells out what the trigger for the reaction is, and then what that response is. So again, the knight always had access to a reaction, but the damage for the knight got a serious bump overall, but at the cost of the leadership ability. All right, this is also one I'm really interested in, is the Ogre. Because ogres are fairly mundane in the grand scheme of things, so I'm curious if they got any serious changes. Well, they did get a little bit of a hit point bump here. They had 59 before. It's now 68. Not too much extra. Damage is +6, 2d8 +4. That's the same. And looks like the javelin is the same. So the ogre didn't really get much other than a little bit more hit points. And then again, it has, excuse me, the gear tab or little line here that shows you great club and javelins is what you get from it. Now, pirate here. Pirate is a unique creature. There are a couple of different kinds of pirates that have different names from like Ghost of Saltmarsh and other things, but this is the only pirate, like base level pirate, if you will. So this pirate, 14 AC, 27 hit points, challenge rating 1, so a little bit above, or, possibly a potential swap in for a cultist, or potentially swap in for something like a bandit. It makes 2 dagger attacks, which are pretty standard, but it can replace one of those attacks with a use of Enthralling Panache. And Enthralling Panache is a wisdom saving throw DC 12 against one creature it can see within 30 feet, and if it fails, the target has the charmed condition until the start of the pirate's next turn. Again, I think this is quite literally, the name says it all, right? Enthralling Panache. It's supposed to just be that kind of charming pirate, and then it kind of literally charms a character if they fail that saving throw. And again, you can see the gear here, 6 daggers and leather armor. Now, this is an interesting one, because there is a creature flat out called from 2014 Pirate Captain. This is also called Pirate Captain, and this is a vast change in the challenge rating. So this Pirate Captain comes to us from Ghosts of Saltmarsh. This Pirate Captain, obviously, is from the new book, but it jumps up from a challenge rating 2 to a challenge rating 6. That is a pretty substantial jump. And I think they're fundamentally just 2 creatures that are different in every possible way, but they do have the same name, which is interesting. And I don't actually see any of the same abilities on either one of these, but I just thought it was interesting to bring up. This is the first instance where we've seen something that there is a creature named Pirate Captain here and a previously existing creature called Pirate Captain, and they are vastly different in their what they're able to do. So consider that. But anyway, the Pirate Captain, challenge rating 6, pretty substantial fight here, right? AC 17, hit points of 78. Also, a character here canonically with a pistol, right? So it'll have a pistol and a rapier on it if your party manages to defeat them. It can make 3 attacks using the pistol and the rapier in any combination. The rapier does 2d8 plus 4 piercing, and it has advantage on the next attack roll it makes before the end of its next turn, effectively giving it the Vex property built into its rapier, but it's just kind of tied into the attack there. And then again, the pistol does 2d10 plus 4 piercing damage. It has Captain's Charm, which seems like an increased version of Enthralling Panache that it can do as a bonus action, which again, reminder that the pirate had to replace one of its attacks to do Enthralling Panache. The Pirate Captain can do this as a bonus action. So it not only has actions, bonus actions, but it also has reactions too. Captain's Charm is a DC 14, and again, same thing as Enthralling Panache, charm a creature until the start of the pirate's next turn. And then it also has a riposte here as a reaction. The trigger is The pirate is hit by a melee attack roll while holding a weapon, and the response is the pirate adds 3 to its AC against that attack, possibly causing the attack to miss. On a miss, it gets to make a free rapier attack against the triggering creature. And then next up here, we have a stone golem, another creature that I'm very curious to see what the differences are. Wow, okay. First of all, stone golem gets an armor class bump to 18 from 17. Hit points go from 178 to 252. That is a pretty sizable jump in hit points, if I do say so myself. Notice we also have ditched it used to have immunity to poison, psychic, and again, bludgeoning, piercing, slashing from non-magic that wasn't adamantine. They have removed that entirely. So it is just immunity to poison and psychic damage, as well as the condition immunities it had previously. So you can hit a stone golem with a mundane dagger, and it does full damage, which is an interesting choice. It does have immutable form, which now it flat out just says the golem can't shapeshift, which is highlighted as a specific ability here. So why don't we go ahead and open up shapeshift in the rules glossary. Shapeshifting. If an effect such as wild shape or polymorph spell lets you shapeshift, it describes specifically what happens to you. Unless that description says otherwise, any ongoing effects, conditions, spells, curses, etc. carry over. You revert to your true form if you die. So immutable form means now reads you can't shapeshift. It has magical resistance, which does state it has advantage on saving throws against spells and other magical effects. And again, as I mentioned in previous videos, it used to say magic weapons. The golem's attacks are magical. We have removed that in favor, usually allowing them to choose a different damage type. And as such, we can see here that the stone golem has 2 attacks, the slam or force bolt attack, and it just does bludgeoning damage plus force damage. So we can see here that the slam attack is plus 10 to hit still, used to do 3d8 plus 6 bludgeoning, now does 2d8 plus 6 bludgeoning plus 2d8 force damage. And then it has the force bolt, which is a wholly unique ability that it did not have previously, which does 4d12 force damage. That's a pretty sizable jump. And just like a ranged attack that it did not have previously. And it used to have a slow ability that recharged on a 5/6 that was effectively the slow spell without being the slow spell. Now it just casts the slow spell. Still recharge on a 5/6, still a DC 17, but it casts the slow spell requiring no spell components, and it uses concentration. So it does quantify now that it does all of the things that the slow spell had done previously. It just doesn't need any components, which means it obviously can't be countered or anything like that because you don't know it's coming. And then again, it would use that as an action as opposed to any other abilities, whereas it could slam or force bolt interchangeably. Now, I spoke out of turn. I didn't realize that the Incubus actually has the Succubus actually has some different capabilities from the Incubus. Now, previously, like I said, they were more or less the same. But if we were to take a look at the Succubus, it actually has some different abilities than the Incubus. It has the capability, once again, to shift to an Incubus after a long rest. The hit points and everything seem to remain the same, all of this stuff. However, it has it's multi-attack. It has Fiendish Touch, as opposed to... Actually, I'm going to go ahead and scroll up and just grab the Incubus to just do a side-by-side comparison, because I think we have to here. The Incubus versus the Succubus here. We'll compare the two versions. The Incubus, as we talked about, had the Nightmare Touch, which did the psychic damage and no short rest. The Succubus has Fiendish Touch, which is much less on the damage side and does a d6 plus 3 psychic damage. So very similar to the original Incubus Succubus ability. It can make 2 Fiendish Touch attacks and can use spellcasting to cast Dominate Person. It can replace 1 attack with the use of Draining Kiss. So it can always do 2 Fiendish Touch attacks and cast Dominate Person, which it has at 8th level, by the way. An 8th level version of Dominate Person with a DC 15 saving throw. So every turn the Succubus... So I like that they actually have a little bit of different abilities here, with the Incubus being able to shut down some healing, and then also having the bonus action Nightmare ability. Whereas the Succubus can do less damage with the Fiendish Touch, but it gets the free Dominate Person at level 8. And then it does have Draining Kiss, which is a Constitution saving throw DC 15. One creature charmed by the succubus within 5 feet of it. So again, you have to be charmed. But if you fail that saving throw, you're going to take 3d8 psychic damage, half on a success. On a failure, the target's hit point maximum is reduced by an amount equal to the damage taken. So very similar, almost identical to the original Draining Kiss ability. They also have once a day hypnotic pattern, and the succubus has the shapeshift ability here to resemble any small or medium humanoid. So again, it can shapeshift, whereas the incubus just has disguise self. So interesting to see, because I had saw originally a stat block comparison somebody put up online that looked almost identical. It's nice to see that they do have a decent amount of differentiation between the two. A lot of the core stats and things remain the same, but like the incubus is going to deal increased damage with some healing shutdown, and then it has a nice powerful bonus action that could potentially just knock people unconscious. Whereas the succubus has an ability to lower maximum hit points with the Draining Kiss, and then has more attacks plus that built-in 8th level Dominate Person. Again, reminder that the succubus is level or CR 4, and it has a level 8 at will Dominate Person spell, which is pretty wild. And again, reminder that Dominate Person at level 8 does what? It lasts for up to 8 hours. So that is an 8+ hour Dominate Person that your party member could be under, potentially. And then again, it gets the Shapeshift ability, which is, again, a little bit better and more powerful, in my opinion, than Disguise Self, because Disguise Self obviously doesn't hold up to physical inspection, whereas Shapeshift does. And then again, it gets that as a bonus action, which is more of a, like, roleplay evasion kind of an ability there, whereas the Incubus just gets a damage ability as a bonus action. So I like the differentiation between the two. It also potentially makes an Incubus-Succubus combo extremely dangerous, with the Draining Kiss ability from the Succubus comboed with the Nightmare ability of the Incubus, knocking people's maximum hit points down, and then if they're at a certain number of hit points or lower, just knocking them unconscious potentially. Really powerful combinations there. Just a lot of damage being thrown around. Again, the being able to just swap your Dominate Person every turn for free because it's at will, very, very powerful. And lastly, the last creature we have here is the Tough Boss, which does not have a direct correlation. So this is a challenge rating 4 creature, 82 hit points, and we can see again it has chainmail, heavy crossbow, and a warhammer. It has pack tactics, which makes it very difficult to deal with, giving it advantage on attack rolls if it has an ally within 5 feet of a creature. And then it can make 2 attacks, to either the warhammer or the heavy crossbow in any combination. Again, its warhammer is going to do 2d8 plus 3 bludgeoning, which is more than a typical warhammer would do because it's got that extra d8 tacked on. And if the target is larger or smaller, it can push them up to 10 feet away. Again, effectively giving it the push ability from Weapon Mastery. And then its heavy crossbow does 2d10 plus 2 piercing damage. So I think overall, looking through these 2024 monsters that we have, it's nice to see that some of them did get some pretty interesting changes. Again, like the differentiation between the Incubus and the Succubus. Some of the changes, like, again, the Gray Ooze now has reactionary damage. The Fire Elemental has vulnerability to cold damage, but some other abilities here. So I'm liking a lot of what I'm seeing with the updated version of the stat blocks. So I'm hopeful. Then we saw the Ogre basically didn't change at all, minus a little bit of increased hit points. So I'm hopeful that when we get the final 2025 monster manual, that a lot of the monsters are going to have little improvements or adjustments here to make them stronger, so that they are more potent to deal with the fact that most of the player characters have gotten significantly stronger with the updates to the base classes as well as the various subclasses. But let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comments down below. I'll see you all next time.